Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the next chapter in NWN Carousel's eXcellerate podcast series. My name is Chris Poe, Vice President of Security Offerings here at NWN Carousel, and I will be your host for today. Welcome. Today's topic, as you may expect, is security. And I think we can all agree that there's a myriad of different topics and perspectives to take in discussing security these days. Today we'll be discussing security architecture overall, especially as it relates to the ever-evolving hybrid work landscape, something that has impacted all of us, I believe, especially in the wake of the pandemic and the shift that so many organizations went through in embracing remote work. Today's guest is a 25-year veteran of the cybersecurity industry who's held various roles focused on security and architecture, working with organizations of all sizes across multiple vertical industries. But we'll ask him to introduce himself in a little bit more detail. Welcome Mark Stephens, one of only 6 global cybersecurity architects with Cisco. Mark?
Thanks, Chris. And thanks for the invitation to join today.
I appreciate you joining us. And if you wouldn't mind, it'd be great. I know you've been with Cisco for close to 25 years now, and in various roles. I'd love to have you maybe step us through a little bit through your career progression, and then I'm curious what your take is on what's different now versus what things were like in the security space when you started.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, when so I've been just shy of 25 years here at Cisco. And to be honest with you, and I always like to tell people this is 25 first years, because the market changes so fast and technology changes so quickly that every year, especially in our industry, it is a case of having to renew and relearn technologies, how we're delivering it. When I first jumped into when I first joined Cisco, part of my background was I was an SNA to IP migration specialist. That means for some of you people out there that may not know what SNA was, but it was a protocol that was founded for communication with mainframes. It's like, Chris, you asked that question about what's different today and what's the same. I mean, what is the same is we're tying users to applications. What is different? Everything in between, right? In reality, So I by chance, I'm moving through the enterprise networking. So when I first joined Cisco, I was an enterprise SE working with enterprise class customers in the northern Ohio area. That's where I live. And we had some great opportunities of revamping, moving to modernizing data centers, moving from SNA to IP technologies. And then the big wave of IP telephony came in, where we were basically moving away from the PBX and into IP-based telephony systems, which today sounds like, of course, but back then, it was revolutionary, right? Sure. Remember the days of PBXs when we had those large systems in the basement and every phone was manually wired into those PBXs. That seems like archaic now, but it's reality. That's how it was. And an interesting lesson there, which I can tie back to when I was doing the SNA migrations, is that for the user perspective, nothing changed. They still, if we were talking IP telephony, they still wanted to pick up the phone, they still wanted dial tone, and they still wanted to be able to make calls. How the traffic was transported, that wasn't their problem as a user. No different from that SNA user, right, the IBM user that was trying to log into their green screen as we moved into different applications. Think SaaS. Right, we open up our browser today. We browse to the application. We log in, and we're expecting to be able to be productive. Yeah. Those are the same things that we were doing all those years ago. But now, how we transport that across the network, where we can make those calls from. There was once a time where we actually physically be in a location to do work. Now, work is a thing we do, not a place we go. Right? I think that's the saying that we hear frequently. Right. That is so true in what we do, right? And I know where hybrid work is a big focus that we're going to look at. That's in exactly the same area. It's the ability to be productive from wherever you are and to be able to focus in. So for me, I joined Cisco for SNA. We moved into IP telephony. I did achieve my CCIE, which is Cisco's certified internet expert program, way back when, in route and switch. And a multitude of other Cisco certs. And then I discovered security, and only by chance. So at the time, I think my manager said, "Hey, Mark, we need someone to look after the PIX firewall." And at that time, it's like, "Oh, really? You want me to do something else?" Did I not know that I would meet my new love, which is security, right? And moving from a layer 4 firewall into the capabilities of threat detection that we have now and the visibility, although it's night and day, it is that progression of technology. I like to feel like to stay in this industry, we should always stay hungry, and we should always be ready to learn. And so, I'm pursuing a master's program right now via the SANS Technical Institute around cybersecurity engineering. And it is there is always something new to learn and something new to understand. So, I mean, for anybody listening, if you're new in career, don't stop learning. Right? That's the way I would look at it.
Yeah.
And Cisco has been a phenomenal employer to me, and has given me great opportunities, and also the types of customers I do work with. Whether if it is, as you called out, is like I've worked in lots of different industries, from manufacturing to healthcare to financial and more, into the retail space and higher education. It's over the course of my career, there's been some fun things. I'll tell you one last thing that I kind of had some fun doing was supporting the vice presidential debate that was held. I don't even remember the year now, 2008. It was at the Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, and I was the principal architect from Cisco on that project, and that was interesting, working with the Secret Service and supporting that for when the candidates came in and everything stopped, right? It's kind of like, okay.
Yeah, I'll bet that was really cool. It's funny you mentioned SNA and the fact that I do remember SNA. Just that dates both of us and how far back our careers. We were talking about X.25 earlier today too, right? So it's funny how the technologies change, but the problem is always the same. And I think one of the things that's also interesting about what you had said a moment ago is it's not about where work isn't a place, work is an activity, right? And I would also say it's not about work hours anymore. You don't have like the work week. I call them working moments because, whether it's with mobile devices or your laptop or when you're, no matter where you happen to be, you can work. And so there's a great great element of work-life balance that can in some ways be garnered from folks by being able to work, sneak in these little bits of work whenever they want to. And on the other hand, it's also you kind of lose the separation of work and home life as well by having these devices with you. But it's an interesting problem to have to deal with. The other thing that I thought is really cool is I too was around and early in my career when Cisco jumped into the IP telephony space, and one of the things that I vividly remember folks saying is that why would you take something that has been its own isolated system, is incredibly mission critical, and put it on an unreliable IP network. Laptops crash all the time. And security and stability became even more important than ever before as a result of that. And clearly, here we are, 20 years later, and everything's worked out the way that it's supposed to have worked out. Everything's advanced as it's needed to. But it's been an interesting ride for sure.
Yeah, well, and the technology hasn't stopped evolving. If you consider now, right, we moved from PBXs, and I'm a security guy now, but we moved from PBXs to servers being the call center agents or the calling intelligence, and now that's all up in the cloud.
Yeah, right? Applications.
Yeah, it's all applications. But think about what's going on. The user, people making calls. Okay, there's different formats. There's text messaging. There's Teams. There's WebEx. There's video calls. There's shared meetings and collaboration. But at the end of the day, the application requirements never change. It got more complex and sometimes more effective. This is an interesting stat that Cisco provided, that moving forward, post-pandemic, we should expect that 98% of all meetings will have a remote attendee. So that means it almost doesn't matter how many people you bring together, there will always be someone remote that you have to cater for, that has to be productive. So that means that the technology they're leveraging has to be able to integrate in with what everybody else is using. Let's twist that around to security. It also has to be secure, right? Document sharing, there's compliancy requirements, end-to-end encryption. Who's got the encryption keys, right? I know there was some noise in the industry last year about a particular collaboration vendor that their encryption keys were on servers in a country where we know that they asked for the keys so that can snoop, right? So. Yep. It's layers of security in the applications that we have to consider on that side. But yeah, it's here to stay. And I agree with that whole work-life balance. It is managing that. It is sometimes a great luxury if you can attend your child's soccer game, piano recital, whatever in the middle of the week. But sometimes you have to make a call on Sunday evening about something, which it's just the way it is now.
Right. Yep. So it's actually a great opportunity to kind of transition the conversation a little bit. So let's talk about securing hybrid work. The main topic for conversation today is we're starting to talk about that stat you mentioned. 98% of meetings will have a remote participant. Couldn't agree more. And perhaps the best place to start is give me your definition of hybrid work. It's such a hot buzzword, buzz term these days. Everybody's talking about it. I don't know that there's if you get any two people in a room to talk about it, that you'll get the same definition out of them for what hybrid work is. So how do you look at it?
My approach to what is hybrid work, it is the ability to be able to be as productive and have as much access to any resource, wherever that resource is, wherever the user is. So that means, I'm in an office right now. I should have access to all the applications I need to be able to complete whatever role I'm taking. I have. If I leave here and I go to the local coffee place, then I should be able to do exactly the same. If I go to my home office, I need to be able to do exactly the same. That, for me, is what hybrid work means. It's the ability for me to continue my productivity wherever I am, regardless of wherever I am. Now, what changes is how does one secure the environment, right? For the challenges for organizations is to make sure that now those users are no longer on a network that we're managing. How do we secure that? I think about when I'm not connected to a Cisco network, well, the sites that I'm going to need to be controlled, right? I mean, Cisco has policies that I, as an employee, can have to stay within and behave within, and so maybe it's to protect me more than police me, right? I can't go to a website that's malicious. Well, that's a protection control. I can't go to this social media site because it's potentially a waste of Cisco time. That's not the policies that Cisco applies to me or many other organizations. It's more the case of protection, to protect the user from going somewhere when they're no longer in an environment that is managed by the organization. And I think, when you look at hybrid technologies, hybrid remote access or hybrid work technologies, it is the case of that. I not only want to make you productive, but I also want to protect you and deliver as much protection for that user with as minimal concerns for the user. I don't want to make my users jump through hoops to actually log into systems. I want it's the same experience wherever they are.
Yeah, it's funny. I still remember the old adage, and I'll probably get this wrong, but I can give you the most secure network, the most secure IT in the world, that will never, ever be compromised. I can also give you IT that you can use. You choose which one do you want, right?
Right.
And so it comes down to, what does that experience look like? I need to have minimum viable levels of security in place to protect, to protect the organization, to protect the users at the same time as making it usable. So one of the things we don't want to have happen is that, in order for us to be secure, a user has to, authenticate 20 times a day, and now you start to do the math there. If I have, 2,000 employees and they're each having to, re-authenticate, 20 times a day, to do the math, and it's just a crazy balance of productivity and experience with security.
Yeah, I've also seen that the more controls and the harder you make it for an employee, the more likely they are going to find ways to work around your system.
That's very fair.
So, and I've seen it like, okay, we put controls on the person's personal device to stop them going to a website. Well, that means that, on their issued asset, but that just means they bring out their personal device and go to the very same site. Right. So some respects it's better to, like I said, protect them than police the users. To say, like, if you go here, we're going to warn you that this is a malicious site, or it's against policy. You can still go there, but we're watching. Just to let you know on that.
So in expanding a little bit more on the hybrid security space, we had a conversation earlier where we were talking about the fact that the technologies that actually provide security for hybrid work, the same technologies that provide that people have in place or should have in place for securing the enterprise in general. It's just a little bit of, how do you look at it and where do you prioritize? If you're not going to be able to maybe do it all, where do you prioritize those investments or that focus depending upon what the use case is? So clearly there's a number of different security technology areas to focus on in that space. What are the critical components you think that organizations from hybrid work perspective would need to focus on first as a top priority in that effort?
Yeah, so let me firstly, the way I look at what the infrastructure selection that a customer might make, an organization might make, often goes down to the path of what are their operational overheads or their goals to reduce down those operational overheads. So we still have many customers that want to have their own, say, VPN termination point in their own internet edge, that they're managing it, they're care and feeding for the operating system, they're managing the policies in there. That's one, where they physically have a device. The next is, okay, we want to move away from a physical device and virtualize that. So literally as virtual as possible. And maybe we don't do it in our internet edge, we'll do it in a carrier neutral facility. Or we'll do it in a private cloud environment, where now that virtualized VPN concentrator, secure firewall, as an example, would now be in AWS or in Azure. And then finally, there's the last one. I don't want any type of device to manage. I don't want it physical. I don't want virtual. So I want it deployed as a service, and to purchase that access as a service. And that's another one of the architectures that customers go down to. It is often decided on scale. It's often decided on convenience of like, okay, where is the technology? Because if you consider, if we were going to do remote access as a service, so for Cisco it's the Secure Connect today. If we were going to do that as our platform, well, there still has to be a backhaul to take it to be able to connect those users to the applications they need to access. So for some organizations, that is very convenient, and we can have IPsec backhauls into secure locations. Users come in, they authenticate via SAML, right? That typically now is a minimum requirement for control. It must be SAML with multi-factor authentication, certificate authentication, posturing, right? We want to know it's the right user on the right device and the device is healthy. Once we've passed through those, at that point, where are you permitted to go? So, think back to our AAA days. We've authenticated. Now we want to authorize. How do I apply those authorization controls, and where do I put those? And then finally, how do we know where they're going? How do we account for it? So I want visibility. And for some organizations, I have seen it that they want to do full packet capture. So, to do full packet capture, it is easier to do it in an on-premise environment where I'm going to capture all the data. to where full packet capture is not required, but I just want flow data. I want to see all the flows, that metadata. Then at that point, you could make that work in any of these environments, except the SASE part, because you may be limited to the backhaul, the other side of the backhaul into that other managed environment, where then at that point, that's where you gather flow. So if you look at the user requirements, what the organization's outcomes are, this is what we want to deliver. We also have to consider, how do you want to consume it? Is it SaaS service? Is it virtualized in a private or a public cloud? Or is it an on-premise solution in your traditional internet edge? We can support all of those platforms, and it's been interesting looking at customers making those decisions along the path. Because of sheer scale now, we're seeing more and more organizations wanting to move away from leveraging a full VPN client and just wanted to do either, say, split tunneling off of a VPN client, or to do completely clientless. And to do a reverse proxy. And again, we have solutions that can deliver those. It is important when we're working through those hybrid work scenarios, understanding exactly what does the customer or what does the end user need to do. And historically, and I've been working around VPNs for remote access for 20 plus years, and it has always started off with, what applications do you need? And then typically what happens is, the more applications that a remote user needs to access, then at that point, it kind of crosses the threshold where it says, okay, it makes sense now that we actually have a full tunnel coming back in here.
Scale it up, right?
Yeah, and you nail it up. And one thing that has been that has changed over the years is the concept of split tunneling. There used to be a frowned upon environment where, no, we can't split tunnel. That's insecure. Someone might backdoor and come into our environment. That's not the case any longer. It's organizations are very comfortable about having a split tunnel environment, and what that really means is, like, I need to know what destinations, what's the domains, or what's the IP address ranges, however you identify it, but that's going to be in my protected tunnel. All the other traffic will be going outbound to the internet. Now, that's an important one, because that's where you can't allow that to go natively raw to the internet. Right. We have to send that via some other control, and typically it's a header tunnel. It can be redirected via proxy, whatever the right approach is. Into something like Cisco Umbrella, where we're doing DNS security, and we're also doing secure web gateway to control that traffic. And all of the controls that go beyond there, DLP or remote browser isolation. So we end up with a user, their traffic is going this way if it needs to be protected for corporate use, or going this way behind the cloud edge if it's internet-focused controls that we're looking for.
Right, and I think the thing I think the big thing that's driven that the acceptance of that split tunneling is Office 365. Clearly being able to go direct to where my mail is, where my file sharing is, and where Teams is hosted and everything, versus going across a nailed up non-split tunnel and having to be and having to get out to the internet through some geo region that may not be close to where my resources are.
No, that's absolutely true. Yeah, and in fact, I would say Office 365 is a prime example, but you could add in, WebEx, you could add in Salesforce, you could add in Concur, all of the SaaS applications. Anything that you really don't want to go through a backhaul or even bring through a services edge. One of the areas is, like, we want to be able to inspect traffic. So you think about that hybrid user. Do we want to decrypt their traffic to be able to look at, what files are they sending up? What files are they downloading? Is there malware in that stream? All of those different things that, sending to a secure web gateway, and to do a man-in-the-middle decryption, so we can look at that and use those other engines. Well, that also is resource intensive, which is why scaling to the cloud is really important. But then you will also hear, like, okay, well, you shouldn't really, do man in the middle for Microsoft for Office 365, as it will break the app, right? And Microsoft actually recommend that you don't decrypt that. apply their security controls on that side.
Sure.
So these are all aspects that, from us in an organization, when we're looking at securing that environment, we have to consider that. We have to consider what has been interesting. It's not a yes or no answer. It is, okay, this area we need to do no decryption. This area we must decrypt. And then this other area where we know it's bad, we're just going to deny it completely, so that we don't even have to attempt it, because we've already seen at the DNS level it's a malicious destination we're going to, or it's out of policy. Right? That's some of the advantages of leveraging DNS security before secure web gateway. By the way.
Sure. Sure. Gotcha. So obviously we've briefly discussed a number of technologies, just in the last 15, 20 minutes, and I think there are many technologies that need to be considered as individual technologies, but I think probably the most important thing is that these technologies are integrated, with one another. So help me understand, or help us all understand, why it's so important for them to be tightly, integrated, and how that's generally accomplished.
Yeah, no, it's a good approach, because one of the things that we do often talk about is the platform is important, right? An architectural approach will deliver a better outcome. Now, each of those platforms have to stand on their own, to have the feature capability and the efficacy when it comes to security, to be able to stand on their own. But the goal of integrating them with a bigger platform is to achieve maybe a faster time to detect, a faster time to respond. If we know more information, for instance, a user coming in and authenticating, well, if we're sharing the health about that endpoint and then tracking where that user's going, if there's ever a time where, think Log4j, think some type of a vulnerability that may be exploited, if we can identify endpoints that could have been exploited, it shortens the window for the bad guys to be in our environment. So a platform, for me, generally there's a lot of sharing of information that enables us to make better security decisions. Think zero trust, right? Is obviously a big buzzword. In that environment, it's all about minimum rights access. Well, what does minimum rights mean? Well, we need to know who the user is. We need to know what the device is. What are their permissions? How are we applying those controls? And then what did they do? And then, of course, the important ones is, okay, something changed. The health of the endpoint is no longer healthy, or they did something bad on the network. We want visibility in that, and then to be able to respond and remove them from the environment. I think those capabilities is what a platform can provide over kind of a standalone box, which is plugged somewhere into the network and backhauled. And then the last one would be operational overheads, right? Is it easier to have your NetOps or your SecOps go to a common screen and control, rather than have to leap about in 3 different consoles, cutting and pasting IP addresses when trying to search for a potential incident or event that's actually gone on? Again, another advantage of a platform approach.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more with you in all those respects. Additionally, I would say a platform approach, while a platform can be something that an individual organization assembles on their own with different technologies that they pull together and they integrate together, and they get it to the point where it's delivering what their security program needs. A platform also can be largely composed of elements that are already provided by 1 or 2 vendors or manufacturers that work together and have certified that these things work together. And that also creates an opportunity or creates an environment where, from a training and enablement perspective for your talent, they don't need to be learning about 15 different technologies from 15 different vendors. It's about, well, this is 80% of my functionality is actually available from these 1 or 2 vendors, and it's already tightly integrated together. And so the barrier to being operationalized is lower in my estimation.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think it would be unreasonable to think that there's not a mixed vendor environment in every customer's network, because there truly is.
Right.
But you're right. Where there is native integration And for instance, it could be a SASE environment connecting into the head end. It could be a automated tunnel. So we send out the endpoint, it calls home, it establishes the tunnel. We identify what policies need to be applied on that. If that's all done as part of the platform architecture, it reduces down two things. It reduces down the amount of work for the network operations side to be able to deploy it, but it also reduces down the risk to the organization, because now we know exactly that site just came up and it already has the appropriate policies controlling access, right? And that's the important one, right? We're minimizing risk exposure to the organization. And I think that's where integration really does help.
Yep, couldn't agree more. So I'm going to walk back. I remember you mentioned the PICs earlier, Cisco PICs earlier, so that jogged my memory. I remember back going, God, this is nearly 30 years ago now. I remember staging one of the first Cisco PICs ever made, and complete with the floppy drive boots, back then. And sure, we've come a long way, in the firewall, evolution over those years. So there seems to be so much talk about all the myriad of other technologies, that exist today from a security perspective to pull this all together, but not as much conversation about the good old firewall. So, tell me, is the firewall still important? How relevant is firewall today to, say, securing hybrid work?
Yeah, no, and it is a good question. So the firewall can be delivered in so many different platforms now. It can be a physical piece, it can be a container, it can be a distributed software that is pushed onto an endpoint. So what does the firewall base function do? It applies policy to permit users or endpoints access. So that requirement never went anywhere. And you could say, well, now in the cloud environment, we're actually able to do that in, network access list or security group access list. But as we start looking up at the next layer, application recognition, dynamic controls, as those now becomes a little harder, more important. The ability for us to actually look at, leverage snort and leverage IPS signatures to look for known events in those signatures, known attacks, exploits being in the actual data feed, that still is now delivered. So malware, I want to look at reputation tables of the users, of the traffic going to known malicious sites. I need to deny that and stop those immediately. If any files passing through, I need to be able to analyze the file, send it to sandboxing to be analyzed, which then ultimately feeds into the rest of my security architecture and my security researchers. Cisco has Talos. They pull apart all of those files, that malicious files that are identified, and then research the background. Right? They look at, okay, how did the DGA, that domain generated algorithm domain, get generated? What IP infrastructure did it use? Have we ever seen that IP infrastructure before? So that firewall is a critical component in our infrastructure still. It is not simply the layer 4 controls, because you're right. You can put that in a switch, you can put that in a router, you can put that virtually in the environment. But some of these newer capabilities are absolutely critical. One new capability that we've delivered in the Secure Firewall 7.3 is a feature called Encrypted Visibility Engine, EVE. And that gives us the ability to look at traffic passing through the firewall without decrypting, so that we can identify malicious flows. We can identify flows that are that really against policy, that are trying to be hidden inside of encryption. Those are some of the things which a general firewall or even just network access list would never be able to discover. Right, so it's still, security is an arms race, in my honest opinion, and we have to continue the technology, the development, and every year there are new patents, new intellectual property applied to this capability. And why? Because the bad actors are adapting. They've come up with a new way to be able to attack an environment. And so we have to stay there. So if you were to ask me, is the firewall important? I would say yes, Chris. The firewall is still as critical now as it was before. It just may be delivered in a very, very a higher number of different formats in the environment.
That's fair. I kind of look at it as it's a keystone technology. You don't really have security if you don't have those capabilities, as they'll continue to evolve. But if you don't have those capabilities in the spots where they're needed, because again, it can be distributed, then you're at risk. And I totally agree.
Yeah, there's a security idiom out there that says prevention is good, but detection is a must. Right, meaning like, okay, if we're not going to protect, we're not going to prevent everything, but we should at a minimum be able to detect it. And if we reduce down and take away those important control points, like a firewall with a next generation firewall that has all those extra visibilities, that can generate net flow, that can identify and look at traffic going through that's encrypted, then we will be basically blinding ourselves to a lot of those. So detection is still critical. Even if it's a signature, we don't have a signature for this particular attack, and we're looking at it post-event, and we want to understand, well, where did it come from, right? If we didn't have that information, if we didn't have that visibility, then we would effectively, be blind, and it would make our threat intelligence and our analysts' job much, much harder.
Right. So let's speaking of analysts, and let's pivot to talent. So. I was reading an article recently where I learned that while more people are entering the cybersecurity workforce all the time, going through education programs like you mentioned you're going through, we're still at a global shortage of about 3.4 million workers in the field, according to ISC2's cybersecurity workforce study. And other data from Cybersecurity Ventures states that there are more than 700,000 unfilled cybersecurity positions in the United States alone, which just blows my mind. So taking that into account and the breadth of the technology areas that need to be addressed in providing a secure hybrid work experience, how are organizations dealing with this? I mean, how is it even possible to deal with this?
No, it's a good one. I mean, Cisco's current security brand is, if it's connected, it's protected. And I think that's what we're looking at doing more of, that security can't be a bolt-on. It has to be part of the infrastructure. It has to be the first thoughts. And we have to make it far easier to be leveraged with a clear understanding and guidance. So that's one of the promises for the future of XDR, right? Extended detection response, to be able to identify what is a real event, what is a real incident, and then to make recommendations of how are we going to respond, so that you could effectively, and that's one of Cisco's goals, is to take a tier 1 analyst and make them as productive as a tier 2 or tier 3 based off of the information we're providing them. So it is, I think it's a two-way, or it's a partnership between organizations understanding what their outcomes they want, and then organizations like Cisco and like NWN being able to deliver the right support, advice, and then solutions to enable them to deliver those outcomes appropriately. If there's some horrible statistics in our industry that says, on average, a bad guy can be in a network for 100 days or more before detected. Well, that is a failing. That's a failing on all of us. And I think one of the things that we need to do is get better at that detection. Well, that part of that detection is to look for anomalies and then to tell the analyst that something is going on in that environment, right? So there's some promising technology out there as we move forward to be able to detect and identify those unusual behaviors. But I think organizations are definitely, I see them bringing together security groups and networking groups to become a joint network security team. And then a separate security team to manage policy and compliancy within the environment. But I think it's become an expected that security has to be part of the infrastructure. It has to be part of what we do. We can't have two houses, one that connects everything and one that breaks everything. That's the security of the 90s, right? So now everything, it is like, what's the risk to the business and how can we best achieve our outcome, detect as fast as possible.
You mentioned the philosophy that Cisco brings forward, if it's connected, is protected. Similarly, at NW and Carousel, our mantra is secure by design. You should not, nothing should be implemented, designed, architected without security being front of mind. Whether there's a security technology involved or not, there are security best practices and features of functionality built into non-security technologies as well that should be properly provisioned. So couldn't agree more with you there.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking to some of your experts, and I know their mantra is like, we need to understand what the customer wants first, and then we work through their capabilities, and then we identify how can we deliver those capabilities. And it is the right approach. It isn't just like, okay, sell this box because this box will solve every problem. That's not how it works. It's not good for the customer. It's not good for the industry.
Yeah, 100%. So. We're getting towards the tail end of our chat here. I did want to go through it. I know you've mentioned a couple of these terms already, but I want to kind of play a little rapid fire word association with some of the hot industry buzzwords, because the three that I have in mind are just terms that we're hearing used in all sorts of different contexts today, and I think that people look at them and have different definitions for them depending upon who you talk to. So let's start with what is probably the hottest one right now, and that would be zero trust. So explain to me, I say zero trust, you say...
Well, I would say segmentation, but it's more the case of, for me, zero trust is a tenet. It's a design philosophy that we would have to apply to whatever we do, right? We have to agree that we are going to ensure the right device has the right level of access, and that should be minimum rights access. It isn't a VPN solution. It is not an IPS or a firewall. That's the outcome we're looking for: connecting users to applications with the minimum rights and the least amount of risk to an organization. Once we've had that, then we can decide on, okay, how are we actually going to deliver that? But for me, zero trust means that minimum rights access and control of user to applications.
Gotcha. And I think, to that point, there's a continuum of implementation or execution of zero trust, right? Because you can define that this is what I have in mind. I would like every single bit of communication to be scrutinized so that, principle of least privilege is applied at every single hop. Yeah. And that might be the panacea that you're striving for. But to get there, it's not something that you can just do in one fell swoop. Would you agree with that?
Right. But we also have to take it back to the beginning of our conversation, where security's job is not to break things. Security's job is to minimize risk, right?
Yep.
So those users still have to be productive, and if that zero trust enables us to be productive, then that's the important part, right? What do you need to do your role, and how can we apply those policies?
Right. So second buzzword, SASE, or I'll also throw SSE in there as well, since it's commonly talked about together, although they're different and related. So SASE and SSE.
Yeah, so for me, SASE is an architecture, right? It's the ability for us to take remote branches, leverage an SD-WAN environment, so that we can control traffic when it's going to our private applications. And those applications may be in our public data center, it may be in our public data center or on our private cloud, public cloud, private cloud. Or it could be users that are going to the internet, direct to internet, meaning like whatever my edge is of my network, that they're going directly to the internet. I need to be able to protect those users. So that's part of what I look at seeing as SASE. So we're not only controlling and protecting the users going directly to the internet and applications, but then also providing a network that's easy to operate and provides all the appropriate controls and to secure our environment for those users going wherever. That, for me, that's SASE. Now, SSE is kind of like the same thing, except without the branches, right? So SSE, Secure Services Edge, now it's more the case of that is where I have remote hybrid workers. I have remote users that may be working from home permanently. Well, I want to be able to secure their access into resources, wherever those resources are, but I also want to secure and protect the endpoint from going to places that may actually put the organization or the user at risk. So how we deliver those controls, I mean, Cisco's got a number of solutions that can deliver that, but for me, that's SASE and SSE.
Very good. Gotcha. And one last one, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So XDR, and you mentioned XDR, but we hear about EDR, we hear NDR, we hear MDR. XDR is the latest, greatest, term that's coming out there. So share with us your perspective on what XDR is, and maybe even as it relates to those others.
Yeah. So for me, XDR is an outcome, right? SASE is an architecture, and Zero Trust is a tenant. And XDR as an architecture, as an outcome, means I need to be able to detect faster and then provide the right response so that either it's automated or that my security analysts can actually take an appropriate action to stop whatever's going on, right? To ensure if it's good or bad and protect it. Now, if you look at certain, pundits out there, some organizations will say, well, you can't have XDR without a EDR integration, right? And it's built around EDR. Another pundit out there will say, no, you can't have it without an NDR. So it has to be an NDR-based functionality. I think in the reality, for me, XDR, it has to have a rich number of telemetry sources. It has to include an endpoint. It should include NDR. It should include things like proxies. It should include things like email. The ability for us to tie together an event. And there's a lot of debate out there of, can an XDR take 2 weak signals and put them together and make a strong signal that we can identify it? Whether that's a nirvana or what, that's my expectation. I'm expecting to be able to say, I have this little breadcrumb here. If I add it together with these whole other breadcrumbs, I now have a sandwich. Or in reality, I now have a security event that I need to take action of. Anything on their own, I probably would not have. But now I see the bigger picture, I need to take an action of. And that's that last R, orchestration, response, right? We have to be able to, and it goes back to one of your questions about how do we scale with the amount of jobs that were required. Right. XDR, I think, is going to help us make better security decisions for a lot of those tier one people. So,
right. Great point. The technologies, while one might argue that technologies will require more talent, the technologies themselves, as they advance and if they're done right, will actually make it so you don't need as much talent. There's a lot more automation that would and self-service that would work there.
I heard something about AI. AI will help a lot of people be paid at the top of their ticket, meaning whatever your best qualification is, that's what we're expecting you to do, because the AI and the other kind of automations or detection engines will take care of all the noise. And you will be left to do the hard stuff. And I think that's going to be one of the promises of XDR.
You get better task-talent alignment there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, closing thought. You're in an elevator at a conference, and door opens, and somebody pops in, happens to be a security manager for an enterprise, and recognizes you from having spoken earlier at the conference, and says, we're very interested in getting started in this all this hybrid work stuff. Where should we start? What quick advice would you have for that individual in the as you go down 20 floors in the elevator?
Yeah, no, it's a good one. I think the first ones would be like all designs, we have to understand what the outcome is. Then we have to understand, you can say, where do the applications live? Where are the users going to be? What are the devices they're going to be under? And then understand the kind of policies that we're willing to apply and how those change based off those users. So, this is Mary. Mary's on a issued asset. Mary's accessing an application in the data center. Well, what policies are permitted there, and what controls should we apply? Now, here's Mary. Mary's on her own machine, but now she's at her grandmother's house, and she's accessing an application in that SaaS. Should that permit the same functionality, the same controls, or does that require a different set of controls? So I think, in that elevator ride, I would be asking that. Frame up the actual conversation first. And an important one I would actually throw out there, especially around hybrid work, or even zero trust to some degrees, it is don't try to solve everything on the first pass. right? Identify where you're going to actually achieve the best results and maybe affect the largest amount of users, and focus on that first. And rather than trying to be everything to everybody, focus on the things you can control, deliver that. Once you have success, then move on to the next one.
Sage advice, sage advice. Mark, I can't thank you enough. It's been a great conversation, enlightening as always. And I thank you so much for investing your time and talent and expertise on the talk today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we look forward to next chapter of eXcellerate podcast, and wishing all a good afternoon. Thank you.